The moment Zara Kingsley, youngest self-made billionaire in America, steps onto the plane, she's used to the stares, but tonight, it isn't the curious glances that stop her cold. It's the stranger already lounging in her first-class seat, smirking as though he owns the world, a white man with sharp eyes and a colder grin. The flight attendant hesitates, the tension between them prickles the air, and then, without warning, the entire plane shudders and comes to a halt before takeoff. Something or someone has grounded this flight, and Zara is suddenly in the middle of a battle that has nothing to do with luxury seating, and everything to do with power, identity, and control. Zara Kingsley stepped onto the jet bridge with the same measured stride she used when entering boardrooms, black-tie galas, and televised interviews that the world devoured. Every gesture was intentional, chin raised, heels tapping with precision, her silk coat flowing behind her like a cloak. She wasn't simply boarding a plane to New York. She was stepping into yet another public arena, whether she wanted it or not. People always watched. That was the curse and privilege of Zara Kingsley at 29. She was the youngest black billionaire in America. Her face had graced the covers of Forbes, Vanity Fair, and a dozen international magazines. People whispered her name in the same breath as legacy dynasties she had long surpassed. Yet for all the photographs, all the glossy profiles written about her rise from obscurity to empire, there was something that no headline or profile could penetrate: her past. She kept it sealed, armored, untouchable, and as she entered the first-class cabin, where the soft lighting gleamed against polished leather, she was aware as always of every eye that turned toward her. Men glanced, women whispered, and a low wave of recognition passed through the cabin like static. She didn't meet their stares. She never did. Her seat to it was at the window. She could picture it before she saw it, the space she had chosen for privacy, the comfort she expected after another draining week of negotiations in Los Angeles. But when her gaze locked onto the row, her steps faltered. Someone was already there, a man. He was dressed in a navy suit that looked tailored, but old, not flashy or newly bought. He sat reclined, one leg crossed over the other, his polished shoes angled into the aisle as though daring someone to object. His posture wasn't the lazy sprawl of a passenger who'd accidentally stumbled into the wrong row. It was ownership, claim. His eyes lifted as Zara approached, gray-blue and cool, with the faint glimmer of a smirk tugging at his mouth. For a split second, Zara wondered if she had mistaken her seat number. But no, her boarding pass was tucked neatly in her clutch, and she knew the digits as well as her own signature, 2A. She stopped directly before him. "You're in my seat," she said evenly. Her voice carried the weight of command, the same tone she used when shutting down condescending investors. Usually, that tone left no room for hesitation. Usually, people moved. But this man only tilted his head, studying her with the calm interest of someone examining an artifact. His smile sharpened. "This seat," he said, his voice low and smooth, "was always mine." Passengers nearby shifted, sensing the tension. Zara remained still, though the pulse in her throat quickened. She wasn't accustomed to being contradicted, not like this, not in so direct and deliberate a way. "The boarding pass says otherwise," she replied. She slipped it from her clutch and held it up, not to him, but to the flight attendant, who was just stepping into the aisle. The young attendant blinked rapidly, caught between the billionaire, whose face she had surely seen in headlines, and the anonymous but commanding man occupying her place. She stammered, "Yes, Miss Kingsley. I see. This is your seat, sir. May I check your pass?" The man reached into his jacket pocket without hurry, without the fluster of someone who had made an error. He pulled out a pass, unfolded it with deliberate grace, and handed it over. The attendant frowned, brows knitting, before glancing uncertainly at Zara. "There seems to be a duplicate." "Impossible," Zara said, her tone ice. "The system doesn't make mistakes." The attendant fumbled, voice dropping. "I'll speak to the captain, please. Just a moment." She hurried away, leaving behind a wave of whispers. Passengers leaned toward each other, phones discreetly raised to capture the billionaire locked in a strange standoff. Zara's gaze snapped back to the man. He hadn't moved. He didn't even acknowledge the stir he'd caused. He simply looked at her, one eyebrow faintly arched, as if amused. "Stand up," she commanded. For a moment, silence stretched. Then he leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees, and lowered his voice. "You've spent your life buying seats you never earned," he murmured. "Why should this one be any different?" The words were a spark against dry tinder. Rage flared in her chest, sharp and searing. She opened her mouth, but before she could reply, another attendant appeared, accompanied by a supervisor. They bent over the two boarding passes, whispering urgently. The supervisor's eyes flicked between Zara and the man, sweat glistening at his temples. "We will resolve this right away, Miss Kingsley," he said. "Please, if you could wait." "No." Zara cut in. Her voice rang loud enough to still the murmurs around them. "I won't wait. This is my seat. Remove him." The supervisor swallowed. Of course, but, always a but. Always hesitation when her authority was challenged in public. She could see the wariness in their eyes, the calculation, a wealthy, powerful black woman versus a calm, white man who exuded quiet confidence. To them, she was a problem to de-escalate. To him, she was prey. Zara stood taller, the silk of her coat glinting in the cabin light. Her jaw set. "Do it now," she ordered. The man leaned back, hands folded casually in his lap. His gaze never wavered. "You should sit somewhere else, Miss Kingsley. This seat and I are inseparable." Her skin prickled. The way he said her name slow, deliberate, felt invasive. As though he had been waiting for this confrontation, the supervisor opened his mouth. But before a word could leave, the intercom crackled. The captain's voice boomed through the cabin. "Attention passengers, we've been instructed to ground this flight temporarily. Please remain seated. Do not attempt to disembark." A collective groan rose. Confusion swept through the rows. People unbuckled belts, craned necks, peppered attendants with questions. Why grounded? What's happening? How long? But Zara heard none of it. She was locked in the gaze of the man into A, who hadn't flinched at the announcement. His lips curved into that same unsettling smirk, as though he had been waiting for this exact moment. As the cabin buzzed with unrest, he whispered just loud enough for her alone, "I told you, this seat was always mine." The air inside the cabin thickened with every passing minute. Passengers shifted restlessly, their murmurs growing sharper, agitated. Some tried to call loved ones, phones lighting up with impatient swipes of fingers, while others pressed attendants for answers they didn't have. The doors of the aircraft remained sealed. The jet bridge had been withdrawn. The plane was grounded, yet no one was permitted to leave. Unease bled through the air like a gas leak, odorless but suffocating. Zara Kingsley sat motionless in the aisle, her eyes fixed on the man into A. He had not moved since the captain's announcement, not a twitch of discomfort nor even the pretense of curiosity. His posture was steady, his hands folded in his lap with an air of possession, as though the chaos unfurling around him had nothing to do with him, or perhaps had everything to do with him, and he simply enjoyed the spectacle. What unsettled her wasn't just his refusal to yield the seat. It was the way he seemed to expect all of this. The flight attendants continued to shuffle between passengers, repeating the same useless refrain, "We'll have more information soon. Please remain calm." But calm was dissolving. A man in 3C loudly demanded compensation. A woman clutched her child and muttered prayers under her breath. Tension multiplied, an invisible charge racing through the rows of leather seats. And through it all, he sat still, watching her. Finally, Zara lowered herself into the empty seat beside him to be, though she had no intention of staying there. It was a tactical decision, proximity. She leaned slightly toward him, her voice ablaze under velvet. "What are you doing?" His lips twitched. Not quite a smile. "Sitting. This isn't a game. You've caused a scene, and now the flight's delayed. Do you understand how many people—" He cut her off with a glance, sharp and deliberate, like a scalpel. "Zara Kingsley," he said softly, "still rehearsing speeches even when you're cornered." The words jolted her, the familiarity, the intimacy of how he spoke her name. It wasn't the detached recognition of a stranger citing a celebrity. It was layered, weighted, as though he had said it before, years ago, in a place she couldn't remember. Her spine stiffened. "Who are you?" He leaned back, the overhead light casting the hard planes of his face into shadow. "You wouldn't like the answer." Passengers nearby glanced toward them, sensing the quiet duel unfolding in row 2, some with curiosity, others with sympathy for Zara, and a few she noticed with an unexpected sting, watching the man with a kind of gravitation, as though drawn to his calm presence amidst the panic. Zara folded her arms, hiding the tightening of her fists. "Then enlighten me, because right now, all I see is a trespasser." The corner of his mouth curled. "Trespasser." That's rich, coming from you. He leaned closer, his voice dropping low enough for only her to hear. Tell me, do you still dream about the factory? The words punched through her composure. Her throat closed. She blinked once, hard. What did you just say? His gaze held hers, unyielding. The factory, with the broken windows, the one you used to sneak into after school, alone, hiding from the others. The noise of the cabin dinned around her, replaced by the rushing in her ears. The factory, nobody knew about that. Not the media, not her business partners, not even the carefully curated profile she had crafted for interviews. The derelict textile factory in her hometown had been her refuge. The place she went to escape voice she couldn't bear to hear. She had never told a soul how the word escaped her lips before she could catch it. He smiled faintly, satisfied. Because I was there, the statement hit her chest like a blow. But she masked the falter, tightening her jaw, drawing her mask of control back into place. She would not give him the satisfaction of seeing her unravel. You're lying, she said coldly. Am I? His voice was soft, intimate, as though sharing a secret instead of delivering an attack. I could tell you what you wrote on the rusted beams, or the songs you hummed when you thought no one could hear. Would you like me to? Zara's stomach churned. No, impossible. Yet the precision of his words burrowed into her, igniting old shadows she had buried under years of empire-building dot around them. Passengers' discontent grew louder. One man barked at the attendants, demanding answers about the delay. Another suggested the airline was covering up a bomb threat. Rumors metastasized like a virus, and still, the doors remained locked, and Zara realized, with a creeping dread, that the passengers were beginning to divide not just in frustration, but along a subtle line of allegiance. Some shifted closer to her, murmuring about unfair treatment, about how she deserved her seat. But others leaned toward the man, eyes flicking to him as though his calm had become a kind of anchor in the storm. It was irrational, absurd, yet the cabin was becoming a theater of perception, and the man knew it. She could see the awareness in his eyes, the satisfaction of watching lines being drawn. She forced herself to meet his gaze. What do you want from me? His expression sobered, the smirk fading. What I've always wanted. For you to face the truth. Her pulse spiked. What truth? But before he could answer, the cabin lights flickered, a startled gasp rippled. Through the rows, the overhead bins rattled faintly, as though something heavy had shifted inside. Then, just as suddenly, the lights steadied again. The intercom clicked on. The captain's voice strained. Ladies and gentlemen, please remain calm. We are. The line cut abruptly, leaving only static. A child began to cry. A woman muttered a prayer. Panic sharpened, tangible now, scraping against every surface. Zara turned back to the man in A. His eyes gleamed in the dim light. He leaned forward, his breath brushing her ear. It begins with you, he whispered. Her skin chill. And in that moment, with the cabin trembling on the edge of chaos, Zara Kingsley realized this was no longer about a stolen seat. This was a reckoning. The cabin was no longer an aircraft. It had transformed into a crucible. The stale recycled air carried sweat, fear, and the heavy static of suspicion. Passengers no longer whispered, they snapped, muttered, argued. Phones buzzed uselessly as connections dropped. The closed cabin doors seemed to shrink the walls, compressing everyone into a state of collective agitation, and at the center of it, like a black star bending gravity, sat the man in A. Zara Kingsley's pulse thrummed against her ribs as she kept her gaze fixed on him. His stillness was no longer calm, it was predatory. He hadn't moved, hadn't so much as shifted since the lights flickered and the intercom died. Instead, he waited, poised, as though savoring the moment. You're enjoying this, she hissed under her breath. His smile was razor thin. I told you, Zara. It begins with you. She inhaled slowly, steadying herself. She couldn't let him see fear, billionaire or not. In this cabin she was stripped of all the weapons she normally wielded, money, influence, her carefully controlled image. Here, she was a woman locked in combat with someone who had chosen this battlefield specifically. Because it nullified her advantages, she leaned in, her voice steel. You're not a stranger, are you? His eyes glinted. Finally, you're asking the right question. And then he said a name. Her father's name. It struck like a gunshot, so loud in her mind she half expected the passengers to flinch. But they didn't. They were too absorbed in their own rising panic. Zara's breath stuttered. She hadn't heard her father's name spoken aloud in years, Not like that. Not with that cadence of familiarity. He had been gone since she was 16, swept away in a financial scandal that had nearly destroyed their family. Before she clawed her way out and built her own empire, her father had been brilliant, reckless, and undone by men who smiled in his face while sharpening knives behind his back. Zara had always assumed his ruin was orchestrated by faceless suits, corporate rivals who never showed their hands. But now hear this man. You, her voice wavered, then steadied. You knew him. His smile deepened, cruel in its satisfaction. I didn't just know him. I made him. The words landed with surgical precision. Zara felt the air vanish from her lungs. Passengers nearby turned their heads, catching fragments of the exchange. Their expressions flickered, some confused, some curious, some already making judgments without understanding the full story. And that was the man's brilliance. Every sentence he uttered wasn't just for her, but for the audience watching. You're lying. Zara snapped, her voice louder than she intended. He didn't flinch. Am I? Or do you already know the truth and just prefer to bury it under money in glass towers? You wear your empire like armor. Zara, but I see the cracks. The cabin around them seethed. Arguments sparked in pockets. One passenger accused the airline of a cover-up. Another demanded to be released immediately. Someone else swore there was a bomb on board. The attendants tried to calm them, but the crew's reassurances had grown thinner, their smiles stretched taut, their eyes darting toward the cockpit. And in the storm of voices, Zara felt her isolation deepen. She gripped the armrest of 2B, nails digging into leather. If you destroyed my father, why come after me? Haven't you taken enough? The man's gaze sharpened. Because you are the inheritance of his sins. And because he leaned closer, voice slicing through the cacophony like a blade. You built your throne atop his ashes without ever asking who set the fire. Zara's heart slammed. Memories she had suppressed clawed their way back. The nights of silence at the dinner table. Her father's frantic calls behind closed doors. Her mother's tearless stares. She had spent her adult life refusing to look back, telling herself survival required blindness. But now the past was dragged into the aisle with surgical cruelty. The man straightened, raising his voice so others could hear. She sits a mom. You pretended to be self-made, but I knew her before the magazines, before the headlines. I knew the girl hiding in broken buildings, fleeing her father's disgrace. Do you trust someone who built an empire on lies? A ripple passed through the cabin. Whispers flared. Some passengers glanced at Zara with sympathy, but others frowned, doubt in their eyes. Zara felt her chest constrict. He wasn't just after her, he was staging a trial. The cabin was his courtroom, the passengers his jury. She snapped back, her voice sharp. Don't you dare speak about me as if you know me. You destroyed my father, then admit what you are, a parasite. You profit off the ruin of others because you've built nothing yourself. The man's eyes gleamed. Oh, but I built you? The words silenced her. For a moment, the only sounds were the rising arguments behind them, two men shouting about compensation, a woman crying that she couldn't breathe, the dull thud of someone pounding on the sealed cabin door. Claustrophobia thickened, pressing down on everyone. Zara stared at him, her voice low. Ra, you didn't build me. I built myself. He tilted his head, mocking. Repeat that all you want. You're still standing on foundations I laid. And now, his gaze swept the restless cabin. They all see it too, the attendants. Voices cracked as they tried to soothe the passengers. But the cabin was splitting. Sides were forming. Some passengers muttered angrily that Zara was being unfairly attacked. Others whispered that maybe she wasn't who she claimed to be. That maybe this man was telling the truth. A pressure cooker, Zara thought. That's what this plane had become. And the man in the A had his hand on the lid. Suddenly, the intercom crackled. Every head snapped. Toward the ceiling, the captain's voice returned, distorted and grim. Ladies and gentlemen, this flight will never leave the ground. The words dropped like a guillotine. Gasps erupted. Someone screamed. A man shouted that he knew it was terrorism. The attendants froze, eyes wide, waiting for instructions that didn't come. Zara's gaze snapped to the man beside her. He hadn't moved. His eyes were locked on hers, bright with satisfaction. And for the first time that night, she felt something, colder than rage seep into her bones, dread. The cabin was no longer merely restless. It was fractured. Passengers had chosen sides, consciously or not. A cluster on the left whispered fiercely in Zara's defense, shaking their heads at the cruelty of The man into A, glaring at him with outrage, but others, perhaps swayed by his unnerving calm or by the venom he dripped into the air, muttered suspicions. Their eyes darted toward Zara with unease, as though her billions were suddenly a mask concealing something rotten. The air was dense with accusation, sympathy, fear. A fragile balance teetered on collapse, and Zara knew if she allowed this man to continue shaping the narrative, he wouldn't just erode her reputation in this cabin. He would carve cracks that could ripple into her empire itself. That was his weapon, not bombs or guns, but perception. Her palms pressed flat against the armrests for a moment. Her chest threatened to cave under the weight of all the eyes, all the unspoken questions. The girl who once hid in an abandoned factory screamed inside her to run, to escape, to fold before she shattered. But Zara Kingsley was not a girl anymore. She rose. The motion commanded silence, even in the chaos. She stepped into the aisle with deliberate grace, her heels clicking softly against the floor. She didn't need a microphone. Authority in her posture amplified her voice before she spoke. Enough. The words struck like a gavel. The passengers hushed, drawn to her not out of politeness, but instinct. For years, Zara had built herself into a force that filled every room she entered. That power returned to her now, burning away the fog of fear. Her gaze swept the cabin. "You don't know me," she began, her tone steady, measured. "You know what the magazines write. You know the photographs. You know the stories crafted to make me larger than life or smaller than truth. But you don't know me." Her eyes cut to the man into A, who still sat lounging with infuriating calm, and neither does he. He knows fragments, shadows, twisted truths meant to wound. He knew my father, yes. He profited when my family fell, but do not mistake his obsession with my past for authority over my future. A murmur rippled, uncertainty shaken, sympathy reignited. Zara took a step closer to him, addressing him directly, her voice sharpening. "You sit there, smug, thinking you can define me. But I am not your ruin. I am not my father's mistakes. I am Zara Kingsley, and I have built what you could never destroy for the first time." His smile faltered, only slightly, but she saw it. She pressed on, her words steady, a rhythm building like a drumbeat. "You want me to be small, to be the frightened girl hiding in a factory, pretending not to hear the world collapsing outside. But that girl grew teeth. That girl learned to fight, and she doesn't run anymore." Her voice rose, carrying through the cabin, cutting through the claustrophobic hum of fear. "So hear me now. I will not yield. Not this seat, not this flight, not this life. You cannot define me, because I already have." The silence afterward was thunderous. Passengers exchanged glances, many nodding, some clapping softly, others simply watching with newfound respect. The tide had shifted. Where doubt had festered, resolve took root. The audience that had teetered toward his side now leaned toward hers. The man into A tilted his head, studying her. His lips curved back into that cold, dangerous smirk, a speech. He murmured, "You've always been good at performance." "This isn't performance," Zara shot back. "This is truth, and you can't twist it anymore." For the first time, he broke his composure, leaning forward sharply, his voice cutting low, venomous. "Do you think words will save you? Do you think defiance erases blood, erases legacy? Your seat, your empire, your power at all exists because people like me cleared the ground with fire, and one day, Zara, fire returns." Before Zara could reply, a sharp metallic clang reverberated from beneath the plane. Gasps erupted. Passengers lurched against their belts, attendants bracing themselves against the walls. The intercom crackled again. "This is your captain. We've identified sabotage in the engine system. The aircraft cannot depart until law enforcement arrives." The words detonated through the cabin. Chaos erupted, shouts, cries, demands, sabotage. The very word ignited primal fear. Passengers clawed for answers, for explanations. The attendants struggled to maintain control, and in the middle of the storm, two uniformed officers boarded the cabin through the front door. Their presence silenced the frenzy instantly. They moved with brisk authority, eyes scanning, before locking onto the man into A. "Sir," one officer said, voice firm, "you're coming with us." For the first time, his stillness broke, not with fear but with amusement. He rose slowly, unhurried, as though the act was his choice rather than theirs. He straightened his suit jacket, glanced at Zara, and gave a small, mocking bow. "Enjoy your seat, Zara. he said, his tone light yet laced with malice. But don't mistake survival for victory. You haven't won. You've only delayed. The words slithered into her ears, cold and lingering. He allowed the officers to take him, his smirk unwavering as they escorted him down the aisle. Passengers craned their necks, whispering furiously, watching the man vanish through the door. For a long moment, the cabin was still, as though every soul was catching its breath after being strangled for hours. Then slowly, applause began. Soft at first, then louder. Passengers clapped for Zara for her defiance, her refusal to yield, her reclaiming of control. Zara didn't bask in it. She simply exhaled, a long, steady release of air she hadn't realized she was holding. When the applause faded, the captain's voice returned to the intercom, steadier now. We are cleared to resume departure once final inspections are complete. Thank you for your patience. A hum of relief swept through the passengers. Attendants moved to reassure, to tidy, to restore the illusion of normalcy. But Zara knew nothing about this night was normal. She turned back to 2A, empty now, waiting. She slid into it, her rightful seat, sinking into the leather with a quiet finality. But this time it wasn't just about comfort or position. It was reclamation, a symbolic act that declared, "This is mine. You cannot take it." The cabin lights dimmed as the engines roared to life. The vibration of takeoff pulsed through the floor, rising into her bones. Zara rested her head against the window, eyes fixed on the dark runway stretching ahead. As the plane lifted into the night sky, the city lights fell away beneath her. The clouds swallowed them whole, leaving only darkness and stars. And though victory warmed her chest, the man's final words clung like frost. "You haven't won. You've only delayed." She tightened her grip on the armrest. He was gone, but not defeated. This battle was over, yes, but a larger war lingered on the horizon. For now, though, she had taken back what was hers. For now, she had triumphed. Zara closed her eyes, breathing in the thin, pressurized air. Whatever came next, she would face it as she always had. Not as the girl in the factory, not as her father's shadow, but as Zara Kingsley, unbroken, unyielding, unstolen.